In the past few years, there has emerged, another term we're using today, a lot of scammers. There's kind of a phony crypto industry. And of course, when the price of Bitcoin was very, very high, there were a lot of people who had these instant new careers, and they were experts, and they were telling us X, Y, and Z. And Warren Buffett says when the tide goes out, we'll see who's wearing shorts. That's kind of happened with Bitcoin. It seems like there's less hype.
Yes, definitely, and this isn't the first time we see this. Bitcoin's it's the supply is perfectly predictable, but the demand is always varying, and so it's natural that bubbles will form and bubbles will crash, and it's just a typical thing to expect in an easy money economy, because at this point, Bitcoin is an asset in a monetary economy denominated in easy money, whose supply shrinks and increases over time. A lot of people have capitalized on it, but I think it's just an inevitable part of markets teaching people what's right and what's wrong, and people figuring out this is how reputations are built and destroyed, and people will figure out what's right and what's wrong over time, I think.
So, Saif, one thing I really liked about the book is you mention the Belle Epoque period from the 1870s to about World War I, where a lot of great advancements were made under a gold standard. It's sort of interesting that it's now libertarians are never supposed to say anything good about the 1800s. It's become this period where the past is always bad. We all have to be progressives now. So I thought it was really neat that you brought up how productive and flourishing economically that period was.
Absolutely. And I think it's, both economically and culturally, you see this aspect of it. In terms of innovation, there's a study that there was a book that was written a few years ago about the most important innovations in human history. And it contains about 6,000 innovations, more than 6,000. And so one scholar then took these and plotted them by time and then measured them against per capita. And you find that the most innovative period in human history was that period towards the end of the 19th century. That's a quantitative way of analyzing it. But a qualitative way of analyzing it is, I list the things that were invented back then. Everything that we tend to think of as the 20th century gave us this technology was more or less invented in that period. It's astonishing. The airplane, the car, the elevator, sanitation, hot and cold running water, all of the things that make modern life possible were largely invented in that period. And in the 20th century, they were popularized, they were made cheaper, they spread out all over the world. But I think that there's a strong case to be made that that was the time where people had the lowest time preference, where people were thinking of the future much more, people were investing much more, and capital accumulation was happening, allowing more and more innovation and more invention to happen. And I think you also see it in terms of arts and culture. And I think there's a great book by Jack Barzoon called From Dawn to Decadence. It's astonishing. The book is a massive volume of, I think, 1,000 or 800 pages or something like that. And he talks about Western civilization. And he says basically the beginning of the decadence of Western civilization. He times it to 1914. And, he describes it politically, economically, socially, but also in terms of art and culture. And it's astonishing that, that date, 1914, it's no coincidence that that was the beginning of World War I. It's also no coincidence, as I mentioned, that was the beginning of the move away from gold towards government money. I think the two are extremely related, because once you move towards government money, and that's really one of the key concepts in my book, once the money is losing its value, you move from people who are future-oriented towards people who are more present-oriented. And so you see art today is, it takes an artist 15 minutes to draw the painting, whereas, in the past, it would take them years and years of hard work to be able to complete a masterpiece. And I think that's really no coincidence. It's we like to pretend that everything is better today, but we have to differentiate between things being better because of a result of the technologies that were invented yesterday. So, of course, today's cars are better than the cars of 100 years ago, but we're not inventing the new car, if I wanted to be a little bit controversial about this is going to really offend tech people, but really, even the telecommunication revolution, which we think of as a 20th century thing, you could say the internet is just the telegraph with bells and whistles on it. I mean, it was in the 19th century that the telegraph and the telephone and even the computer, that's when they were invented. That's where these inventions came along. And so in the 20th century, we improved on them. But I think if we look objectively, of course, the standard of living today is higher, but it's higher because we've had these things for 100 years. but we're not inventing as many of these things as we had back then.
Subscribe to Mises Weekends via iTunes U, Stitcher, and SoundCloud, or listen on Mises.org and YouTube.